Getting them out will be a bloody story. Should have never been allowed to come into our country. If you come back, you will be executed. You will be killed immediately. Not going to be easy, but we'll do it.
That was Donald Trump over the weekend, telling supporters his mass deportation policy will be bloody if he wins in November. And obviously, it's far from the first time that he's slipped shades of violent rhetoric into his speeches. With just 57 days to go until the election, and with one of the two candidates continuing to say things like that, I found a new book from CNN's Dana Bash particularly timely. History repeats. We always hear that. It tells the story of an election where candidates complained of corruption, violence broke out, and democracy was pushed to its breaking point. Sounds kind of familiar. But no, it's not about 2020 or 2024. It's about 1872. Joining me now is Dana Bash. She is CNN's chief political correspondent and the co-author of the new book, America's Deadliest Election, the cautionary tale of the most violent election in American history. First of all, congratulations. I have no earthly clue how you had time to write a book.
My co-author, David Fisher, is how.
You are a superhuman.
The amazing David Fisher. No, thank you so much for having me.
It's great to see you. So, I mean, this is such an interesting comparison. Most people don't know about the 1872.
I didn't. Did you know about it?
I did not. Louisiana gubernatorial election, but there are a lot of parallels. I mean, there was violent rhetoric. There was violence. It was quite, the country was bitterly divided. Election officials weren't giving up the outcome. They weren't observing the outcome. I wonder, as you hear language, and you've covered, obviously, Trump for many years, as you hear language like this weekend or the violent rhetoric that you hear from him more often than infrequently, does it remind you of 1872? How do you compare it?
The parallels are uncanny in so many ways. One of the ways, Jen, is just with the sort of main character, if you will, who was the governor of Louisiana, Henry Warmoth, who was somebody who had character traits who are so familiar. And I'm just going to read you a couple of examples. People knew Warmoth was a crook, but remained fiercely loyal to him. Their allegiance to Warmoth defied description. It appeared they were willing to die or kill for him. The question was, why? They forgave him all of that. He understood them. He touched a part of them that only few others had reached. He was fighting for them, for the way of life they had once lived. Now, back then, that way of life this was during Reconstruction. It was pre-Reconstruction, pre-Civil War, when obviously slavery was very much in place. And so now what he was helping them fight for at that point was slavery wasn't going to come back, but they wanted to make sure that blacks didn't get power and change their way of life. And back then it was Democrats who were the segregationists and who were the just flat out racists. And so they were trying to do whatever they could to suppress the vote, the new black vote. And in Louisiana and other states, but this particular story is how they were successful in doing so. They realized the only way to keep society from changing so drastically was to make sure that blacks didn't vote, and they were intimidated, they were threatened, they were disenfranchised, and they were murdered, in some cases in a massacre.
There are so many racial comparisons, you just outlined them, to present day today as well, where we see with voter suppression around the country. You've answered it a bit there, but how do you look at those comparisons in terms of how rhetoric is used to kind of suppress the vote, to intimidate people, to make immigrants sound like they are bringing violence to our country? How do you compare this time to that time?
Again, very similar, very similar. There were discussions about rants, about people coming from the southern border back then, just as they are now. And, you know, it was started in 1872, and then it went up to 1876, which people might be a little bit more familiar with because of the parallels there between what happened then and 2021, when things were so bad in Louisiana and 3 other states that they sent 2 slates of electors to Washington. And there was a debate about what the vice president's role was. Was it something that is more ceremonial, or could the vice president choose the electoral slates? And they decided then it was ceremonial. But another familiar thing that happened back then, there one of the riots in the streets of New Orleans erupted in chants, hang him, about the opponent that they were trying to stage a coup against. That was actually the rightly elected governor.
Very eerie.
Yes.
Now you're here and you have moderated the last debate. You also did the one interview with the presidential and vice presidential candidates. So you know a lot about these people, is my point. Neil Katyal was on earlier, and he's a great lawyer, a good friend, very smart. He made a point that I actually hear from people, friends on text chains, people who, when you go to events, why can't the moderators do more to fact check? Now, Trump is a different character, but you moderated the last debate. Why can't they? Shouldn't things change with Trump as a candidate?
I think Neil is brilliant, and I also have so much respect for him. But on the statement that he made to you, I disagree. And what he said was, it is the moderator's job to be a participant, basically, in the debate. And I totally agree when I'm doing an interview. I completely agree when I am maybe moderating a town hall, when the person who is trying to be an elected official doesn't have their competitor there. But if a moderator gets that involved in a debate, they are a participant in the debate. And look, all of this is a judgment call. It's not easy.
Bet not.
But it is a judgment call. And what we decided to do was follow the model that had been in place since Kennedy-Nixon, really, which is the moderators facilitate and you allow the candidates to debate one another, and in that case, fact check one another. I was just talking to Kevin Madden, who worked for Mitt Romney, and about this afterwards, and he said, "Oh, it's a slippery slope." Some people are very much against it, some people are very much for it, but I try to put myself in the position of, okay, let's say what happens when we do fact check. Then where does it end? How far does it go? Again, they are judgment calls. I'm not saying that it is not possible, but it's difficult. And you can be sure that the people who are saying fact check now are going to say, or maybe the other side, depending on how it goes, who is maybe telling the falsehood, will say, well, the moderator had their thumb on the scale. Now, we know what happens in a Trump debate. I'm not saying it's going to be equitable, but it doesn't make it easy.
Well, very few people have sat in that seat to know, which is the other thing to remember. You've also said that we should expect anything or everything tomorrow night, and
Absolutely.
I could not agree more. They've never met in person. They've never debated
weird?
each other. It's very weird. I can't stop thinking about it.
I can't either.
I know. It's wild. Dana Bash, I could talk to you forever. It's amazing. You have this new amazing book, America's Deadliest Election.